I'm a member of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation from northeastern Vancouver Island and the northern portions. And northeast from Vancouver Island is what they call the Broughton Archipelago, my homeland, the Mamliacha tribe. And in the late 1980s, I was sent out by my chief and council to be a watchman and a guardian of our abandoned native village, known very famously as Mamalalakula, village of the last potlatch. Far from the truth, because if you go to the Umijsta Cultural Center in Alert Bay, you can come to understand or speak to one of our people, like myself and others, and you come to understand that we survived the dark days of the banning of the potlatch from 1851 to 1961. But our village, all the same, is abandoned with totem poles on the ground and big house remains. And it's out in the middle of Timbuk nowhere, I like to say, and it's been abandoned for over 20 years in 1988. And it was overgrown with berry bushes and brush and thorns and stinging nettles. And of course, the people, my ancestors, some of my family even that lived there up until the mid-1900s, their fruit trees went wild. So this place is just filled with berries, and during midsummer and late summer into early fall, plums, cherries at one part of the year, apples and crab apples. And it's a beautiful place. And tourists will come from around the world to come walk through Mamalalakula, village of last potlatch. And I was the watchman guardian there from the late 1980s right through until around 2013. And I lived out there many years all by myself. And I had a trailer we'd put on the beach, 26 feet long, with the little 10 by 10 foot addition. And at nighttime, when it got dark, I'd try to go to sleep as fast as I could, because in late summer, early fall, you'd hear the hollering and the screaming, or you'd hear them harvesting the plums behind the trailer at the abandoned homestead site that we're at. And you knew they weren't bears or deer or other humans. They were the big fellas, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. In my language of Kwakwala, we refer to those creatures as Junakwa. The numbers of reports of Sasquatches has increased who knows how many fold. And when I went to central United States and saw on that Indian reservation all the Sasquatches they have, and I hear the stories from Washington State's native people and non-native, and British Columbia and Southeast Alaska and Alberta and Northwest Territories and the Yukon, and the list goes on. Well, the Indians are proliferating like bunnies. So are the Sasquatch, Bigfoot. So we are on the verge of conclusive proof of Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And we have to be prepared for that. But the main thing, what I'm getting to, is quit gifting to those creatures. And when you do have your Diane Fossey, Jane Goodall moment, make sure you have a face mask on, make sure you've sanitized yourself, because God forbid we don't want to give them our filthy, rotten diseases that we have and see that race exterminated because we didn't take precautions so that we wouldn't contaminate them. So use your frontal lobe, show that it's well developed when you meet your Sasquatch, Bigfoot, to have that close encounter of the hairy kind. 2006, I had a tour company with a 12-passenger aluminum tour boat, and I had a camp that has 5 cabins. I still actually have it. That are made of red cedar that look like traditional native longhouses, except they're small, like a garden shed. Just enough room for a queen-size bed and a couple and their child to sleep in. Nice and warm. And it's on Vancouver Island's eastern shore on the Orca Highway of Johnson Strait, so you can watch the orcas. My sister wanted to see it, and she's 10 years younger than me, and she's a concrete Indian. She's growing up in the city world. So I brought her out, and I had a young native worker from Campbell River, and I had a young Dutch fella who was my sea kayak guide. And we're moving driftwood from the beach because the tides come in, and they're big tide, the logs get washed up onto my beach, and you can't bring your kayak on there, and you can't walk on there safely because some of these logs are 2 meters thick almost. And there was all this debris, and I wanted to cut it up with my big chainsaw and then push it out when high tide came that evening. And so we had a nice clear beach when my guests showed up in a few days. So 2 gas tanks in my power saw, and you got to remember this is the largest chainsaw they make, and I'm cutting away and run out of gas, fill it up, start cutting again, and when I'm finished the 2 tanks worth of gas and the job's done, I'm all hot and sweaty, and I said to one of the boys, grab me a pop. I grabbed the pop and I started taking a drink, and I sat down on a folding chair on the beach, huffing and puffing, and all of a sudden just heard trees shaking. And I looked to my right, and there's my cookhouse cabin, and about 15 feet up is a rock bluff, and there's these 2 trees about that thick each, just shaking like when you see a spook movie and you see those people shaking beyond normal. That's what these trees reminded me of. And all of a sudden this big boulder, like I'm talking big, like huge, comes, and you hear the roots ripping and trees breaking. And I looked at my dog, and he's a golden lab cross bush dog, and he's 6 years old, so he's well trained. I could just go spin bear, and he'll chase a black bear and nip at its tail, so he spins the black bear, so I can get out of there. So, you don't want to shoot every bear just because it's got an attitude. You got to use your frontal lobe and show that the animal kingdom needs respect. So get your dog to spin the bear and walk away, call your dog, get in the boat, leave. So anyway, Land Claims was his name. Everybody lifted his leg to pee. We were going to claim it back as Indians. That's why I called them Land Claims. But anyway, I go, Landy, go check. And he runs up that rock wall. It's, got a slope, so it's not straight up and down. And he gets up and he looks behind the trees that are shaking, and he just goes ping, and he springs, and you see this blonde blur come, hit the ground, and he just goes streaking past me. And, I'm not worried about my dog. I'm like, okay, the dog left. Okay, what's up? And then being a bushman, you don't just look at where the noise is. You got to be smart. You got to look left and right, your other points. And as I look to my right behind the cookhouse, some 20 feet, I guess, behind the cookhouse, in the wall of trees, evergreens, there's this thing from this part up looking at me. Shoulders were like that wide. And when I looked at it looked at me, then I went, and I could see the tendons and wrinkles on its neck and its eyes scrunched up. And I was just like, "Ooh, geez, that thing's big." And I'm like, "Hey guys, where's my gun?" "Oh, it's out on the boat." They didn't know I was looking at one, and they're still looking at the trees shaking. And I looked at my sister, and I'm like, "Get in the dinghy, we got to get to the boat." It's 2 of them now. I'm seeing trees shake, and a boulder just got rolled down the hill at me, and not 45, 50 feet over this way behind my cookhouse is another one standing there grimacing at me. So I'm like, "Louise, get in the boat. We got to get out of here." And it's a duck punt little dinghy. Now my 12-passenger tour boat's sitting in the middle of this bay like that with its bow pointing out because there's wind that evening, and I wanted it to ride at anchor. But I also got a starboard and a port line to beach and a stern line to beach to keep it perfectly sitting. I don't want it to swing and hit the beach because of the wind that evening. Well, I look at my dog, and he's over in my dinghy, already in it, cowered down, big tough bush dog, Land Claims. And here's my sister trying to be Jesus Christ walking across the water. It's high tide, all the driftwood's floating, and she's like going like that. And I'm like, "Slow down, you're gonna break a leg." And she's trying to get to the dinghy, and I'm like, "Where's my gun?" And out in the boat. I'm like, "Well, give me an axe or a machete." And I'm like, "You guys get in that dinghy and get out of here," because I had 2 dinghies. So they run over, and they're Jesus Christ too. They're trying to walk on water, and they get in their dinghy. I get in mine, and my sister starts pulling that stern line and pulling the dinghy out to the main boat. Well, it's rectangle shaped. Now she's almost flipping it because she's so freaked out. And I'm like, "Slow down, Louise." I said, "You're going to flip us over." And we get maybe 6 feet from the boat, swim grid, and my dog just bails, jumps, gets on the swim grid. He's half in the water, gets into the boat. I climb on the boat, and I'm like, "You guys cut the sidelines and cut the anchor. I'll start her up." And I went inside the boat, turned both keys from each motor, fired her up. My sister's running in, and she's like, "What's that? What are they?" I said, "They're Sasquatches. Don't worry about it." And she's all freaked out. I look out in the bow of my boat, and there's the Dutch fella, and he's crying. He's like, whimpering like a baby, and he's fumbling and fumbling the lines, and he's just freaked. Like, "Oh, for God's sakes, you guys." So I grabbed my .338 rifle, and I walked on deck, and I was just standing there trying to make these guys be reassured that, hey, we got a gun now, but also showing those big fellas that, hey, this is my kayak camp. You don't come down there and scare us out of there. You got my workers and my sister scared beepless, and all of a sudden you hear that, "Rah!" I says, oh, what's that? And that's when I thought, ah, you sons of guns. So I put one in the tube and lifted it up in the air, and boom, another one, boom. You guys get out of here, and you can have the camp tonight, but I want it back tomorrow, and you guys leave me alone. It's my kayak camp, I'm staying here. So we left on the boat, but it was too windy to get down to Sayward. Because when it's westerly wind in the summer with a big ebb tide like we had, you have mountainous waves, dangerous. So I went across to this place called Port Neville, and we tied up to the dock there, and all four of us slept on the boat that night. Next morning, no wind, we went to Sayward. My sister hasn't been back to camp. And the day after, I went into that camp and I lit her up like World War III. I went in with a bunch of buddies and a bunch of shotguns and rifles, and we lit her up. A couple hundred shots were fired. Okay, right here behind me is where that big boulder is in the rock bluff, where it got pushed down. But you can see these cedar trees here. And that's where that one was standing, not what, 25 feet from me? And back then, you gotta remember, that was 11 years ago. It was like a V, and that's where that thing was standing. And the next day when we came down here, we could see depressions in the moss where that thing was standing. And the feet were probably about that big. And we guesstimated with tape measures that that thing would have been standing 7'4" in order for me to see from here to the top of its head. So it was a big bugger. And just above us here, it goes straight up to about 5,000 feet. That's Newcastle Ridge. And that's where the famous 5 plaster casts were cast that this hunter found, and he cast them in mud that was dry. And Dr. John Bindernagel, he bought 4 of the 5 casts. One of them was broken and lost, but they're considered to be some of the top 5 casts that were ever cast on Vancouver Island. And I have a replica, and it's 18 inches long, so I kind of figure that possibly it was the same bugger that rolled that big rock down on me. Here we go right here. You can see the big rock bluff right at the base here. There's a big boulder right here. And that was the one that was pushed down on us.